To begin with, I've got the piece trimmed to size, and I used a marking gauge set at 7/8 of an inch to mark lines along the length of it, and a square to cut a line across it at each end. And that defines where we're going to cut, where I'm going to cut the rabbet that then becomes the thumbnail molding for this seat. I'll show you a couple of ways to do it. The lines across the seat, I enhanced them with a marking knife, made them as heavy as I could, because when you're cutting across with the rabbet plane, it can tear things up a bit, and it's nice if those top fibers are severed more cleanly. Straight ahead, simple rabbet plane is a perfectly suitable tool for this. When I use a plane like that, I use a fence to guide it for this work. So here I just have that doe's foot I had kicking around, and clamp that down with a holdfast. I haven't marked the depth here, and there's that section of the board with the torn up fibers. This plane has a skewed iron, and when I am first working it, I'm sort of, this is exaggerated, but I tilt it like that, so I'm really just cutting with that corner. But here I'm cutting the wrong direction on the board. And this plane, the iron is a little wider than the sole. So to come the other direction with this plane, I have to knock the iron over. That skews it a bit. So I could switch to a square iron rabbet plane and turn around and go this way. And I've already come down, I'd say almost 1/8 of an inch there. I'm a little bit canted this way. But really all I want to define is that depth. And then I'll switch to a regular smooth plane and start to take down that outside corner. So that's how I begin to form this. It's a little ragged there where I'm hitting that contrary grain. And I just want to show you one more plane that if you cut a lot of these rabbets, it's a handy thing to have, and that's a moving fillister plane, because it's just a rabbet plane with a fence. So I've set that fence for this setting, and that guides it. But I've done the same thing. I'm tilting the plane a little bit. And it's probably best, as I'm working this, I'm wanting to be out here, hanging off the bench. And that way I can get at it a little easier. So now, I've tilted the plane all the way over like that. So I'm just working out here now. And beginning to just round over all those arises and to cut those into facets that one by one you blend all those facets together and it'll look like a thumbnail molding. So now we'll look at cutting across the grain. Same kind of rules apply. My scored line, I was a little bit off with either my saw cut or that scored line, and but it's all right. And now I have a depth I can go to the rabbets I made left and right. Sometimes I've cut this one first with the notion that the long grain ones would clean up any tear out here. These days I probably go any which way. So I've switched to the smooth plane. I know this is just as sharp as can be. I just sharpened it. And I'm skewing it in relation to the travel I'm making, which will make a slicing cut, make things a little cleaner. So this is really one of those things where I'm not going to go by any type of measuring. I'm going by how does it look. And just trying to blend this in. And I can come back and rework those long ones a little as needed. And of course that one I haven't finished shaping, so I'll certainly need to address that. And another shaving I take is right there on that bottom corner, much like the little chamfer I put on the corner of the stiles when I was trimming the stool frame, because you often will pick the stool up there, so you just don't want that sharp corner. And I'll take a block plane and work that last bit of end grain right there to clean up that saw cut. So that's how I make that thumbnail molding. And you begin to see what it looks like. So the finished treatment, and then a very sharp plane set very fine to just dress that a little bit. So I'll continue on with that, and then there's one more step, and that's fitting the seat onto the stool. So I have the seat all made. After I had cut the molding, I planed that, what we call the field or the table of it, flat again. I cleaned up all the scrub plane marks. There'll be a little touch up, particularly out on this, on that troublesome edge where the figured grain was. I can do that after it's on the stool, because I'll have pegs that I need to trim here, so I'll be paying some attention to the seat afterwards as well. So the first step right now is to see how it fits on the stool, and you pop it in place with an overhang in every direction. And one of the things I'm looking at is visual. How does it look? How does it fit? But also I'm feeling to see, does it sit flat on the frame? And as you heard, it does not right now. It's got two high corners here and low corners there. So you can sometimes get lucky, flip it around, and today is not that day for me. It's the same in both orientations. So what I want to do is pair those styles. It's probably that inner section where I was trimming the styles earlier, just didn't get them down enough. I want to keep putting the seat back in the same orientation, so it's worthwhile to make a mark on there, just put a chisel and hit that. So I know that rail, that apron, is where I'm laying that figured edge of my seat. If your seat has no distinguishing features, you could also put that same chisel mark under the seat. That way, as you make your adjustments, you're still checking the same setup as what you were looking at beforehand. So I'll just go ahead and trim those two high corners there to bring this down. And you need to just get it within reason. That much wobble is too much. It's rare that it's going to sit dead flat perfect on the whole frame, but it should be very, very close. And after I get that ready, I'll show you how to set it up to bore through the seat into the stool frame for the square pegs that will fasten it in place. All right, I've got it back set up on the bench, and you can see when I press on the different corners, it now sits flat. And so ready to bore the holes to peg it to the frame. When I first was learning how to make joint furniture back in the early 1990s with Jenny Alexander, one of the challenges we had, and I think we talk about this in the book about joint stools, is trying to come up with the notion of how in the 1600s did they set this seat on here to drill through it, bore through it, for pegging it. And a clamp, like what I'm going to use, any type of clamp, whether it's this hand screw or more modern clamps, were not really part of a joiner's toolkit at that time. And so Alexander and I used to try different ideas for how to do this. One we hit on was to figure out the locations for those holes and to bore small pilot holes for a temporary nail, and would temporarily nail the seat to the four corners. You pull one nail, bore that hole and drive that peg, and then leapfrog around pulling a nail and driving a peg. And we did that, and it works fine. We have no way of knowing how the joiners of old did this at all. And nowadays I use the system I'm about to show you of clamping it to the aprons like that. So all I do is pop just a piece of scrap underneath those aprons and set a hand screw up here, and I just snug that enough to hold it in place right now. I put one in the front, one in the back, and then you have to check your overhang, because you want that to be even, of course. And I'll do this with measurement. I'm looking at, oh goodness, it needs to come a lot to my right. So I'll knock it about this way and that till I get what I like. And that didn't move it near enough. I want about 1.25 inches. That's 1 3/8 inches almost. And that's 1 1/8 inches. This one's coming a little loose. That's why these aren't tight right now. They're 3/16, 3/16. right on the quarter. But then I need to come this way as well. And that's 7/8, 3/4, and this is 1 1/8. So it's a lot of back and forth. Like that. Didn't really move that enough to matter. No. Still has to come that way. And yeah. So a little more fiddling around, and then when you get it the way you want it, I'll have to check these ends again. And then you really lay on those clamps and get those nice and tight, because then you don't want it to move. So let me do that and then we'll bore it. Once I've got the seat set the way I like it, I also sight down from above across this long edge of the seat in relation to the plane of the lower stretcher and feet. Likewise, the short edge against that lower stretcher, just trying to see if those are in the same plane, sort of like looking at it with winding sticks. There isn't a lot of adjustment that you can do then, but I might occasionally tap one corner this way or that. Now, to bore it, first of all, I make one more deviation from period practice and use an auger bit these days. I've bored it with period style bits many, many times, and they don't remove the chips out of the end grain of the style that well. So I'm cheating by using, modern 18th century, 19th century technology. And I eyeball the location of this hole. You might want to take measurements. I'm aiming for inside the style and inside where the joints are. I don't want to hit the tenons. So I can see the style here in this direction, and I'm right about in the middle of it. And then I look here, I might back up a touch like that. And then this angle that the bit is at is just sort of roughly based on that. And then I just step on the stretcher and bore it. And I want to be about, so now I'm through the seat and starting into the style. And for depth, I want to be about, let me grab it all. I want to end up about that deep. Go 1.5 inches into the style if I can. I think I mentioned, maybe I didn't, the size of this bit is bigger than what I used to secure the joints. This is a 3/8 inch bit, and I'm that deep. I could go deeper still. That'll be mostly all right. So it's most of the flutes of that bit. And I forgot my pegs. I'll make some pegs. I like to peg them one at a time. As I bore that, I peg it, just so it won't shift around. So, all right. So here's the pin for securing the seat, and it's a square. It's not an octagon, it's not round. I've just faceted the tip of it to really get it started in those holes. And if you're doing this for the first time, you might make a test hole and size a few of these pegs to try to get the right size. What we ideally want are the corners of that square to bite into the fibers in the seat to really sort of lock that whole thing together. This whole notion of a square peg and a round hole being a misfit in our language, in this application, it's a really great way to fasten this seat down. As I was getting ready to do this today, I was thinking about joint stools I've made, and this is really tempting fate, but I've only ever once split a leg, maybe 120 stools. And on that one, I was able to then split the leg. It had to be removed, so I was able to split it completely to smithereens and get it out of there, salvage all the rails, make a new leg, and somehow wrench them enough to get it back in place. But let's hope we don't split one today. So again, you hold the peg just like before and drive it with a hammer and listen to the sound. Hear the difference there. So, just like before, you can sometimes, if you feel it hasn't gone far enough, you can trim it a little, try to drive it a little bit more. I'm not going to push my luck. I'm happy with the way that's working. And so that's one of the pegs in place, and I'll bore a hole, drive a peg, bore a hole, drive a peg. So, see where that gets us. Into the stile there. And you see me pull the chips up every now and then. I don't wait until I'm at the full depth. I want to bring those chips out of there because you want this to be a nice clean hole for the pin to do its job in there. And I just keep turning in the same direction and pull the brace up as I want to get those shavings out of there. If an adjustable bevel set to that angle helps you get this at the right angle, that's perfectly understandable. And another one of those pins. You could also make a pencil mark on your pin to see that it comes down the amount you need. I don't do any of those things, I just go by that sound, and that has changed. So that's not going any further. This has come loose. Spin it around and keep on going. Now, I'm pegging into the stiles. We do see some where they're pegged into the rails instead. It's a smaller target, and I like to pin it at the corners. But you see old stools done both ways. This is the most common. And people are often kind of worried about wood movement across the grain, across the width of this board. This one is quarter sawn. It won't really shrink and swell much in this direction. But I've used quarter sawn, I've used riven ones that are quartered, I've used flat sawn ones, and I've used white pine on long benches and not had any problems with splitting those seats over time. So I wouldn't stress too much about it. I wouldn't stress at all about it. I'm going to run into that hand screw. That pin's too big, I think. That's a little too big, so I'm going to trim that, and I haven't made the fourth peg yet. So I'll come back in a minute and finish pinning that seat. Trimming these pins is just like trimming the other ones. Just get the stool somewhere where you can get at them, keep it steady. Here I'm keeping the teeth off of the surface of the seat, so I'll have some peg to trim afterwards, but mostly so I'm not scratching the stool seat with the saw tooth. And just slice that off, and then same as before, bevel down this way and that way, and a little more there, and then the bevel up to pair across it to get that trimmed flush like that. Do that to all three of those. So that's the last pins trimmed, and the stool is now all finished. You heard me talk repeatedly about cleaning up that lip right there, that disturbed grain, and what I used to do it was just a shoulder plane like that, just going along, taking very careful shavings, coming this way and that. A little too fussy for my taste for a stool like this, but I did want it to be nice and neat up there. The seat is such a prominent visual part of the stool. And as far as the finish goes, that's very easily done, depending on personal taste. I am inclined to just use linseed oil, usually thinned with a thinner, mineral spirits, turpentine. Nowadays a lot of folks use the citrus thinners, which are very nice to have around versus the other stuff. That puts a finish on it, highlights the carvings and the turnings to some degree, the details of those, and then time will create the best patina of all for a stool like this. I have some kicking around that are 20 and 30 years old that take on a really nice warm color. You can paint them, you can stain them, you do all manner of things, but I wanted to just concentrate on how to build it with this video series. And this has been the first of what I hope will be more here in my shop of how to build oak furniture and do carving and things like that. So I'll keep you posted when more come available.